Clara's hands were shaking as she ripped the contract in half, the sound of tearing paper echoing through the silent cabin like a gunshot. Ezra stood across from her in the firelight, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear mixed with hope, and he took a step forward with his hand outstretched. "Clara, wait, let me explain," he said, and his voice was cracking in a way she had never heard before. "I know I broke Clause 3. I know I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you, but I did, and I can't take it back even if I wanted to." She looked down at the torn pieces of their contract scattered on the wooden floor, the words, "Emotional Detachment Clause," visible on one of the fragments, and then she looked back up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You weren't supposed to make this real, Ezra," Clara whispered, and her voice was breaking too because she had spent the last 30 days trying so hard not to feel what she was feeling right now. "This was supposed to be fake. This was supposed to be business. You weren't supposed to write me into your book like I was someone worth loving." But we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, aren't we? To understand how these two people ended up in a snowy cabin in Vermont tearing apart contracts and confessing feelings they were never supposed to have, we need to rewind the tape back to where this whole mess started. And believe me, this story is going to take you on a roller coaster ride of emotions that you won't see coming. Meet Clara Vance, 26 years old, living in New York City, working as a junior editor at Sterling and Rose Publishing, and she has a problem. Now, her problem isn't that she's uptight, even though her coworkers definitely whisper about how she schedules her entire life in 15-minute blocks and color codes her calendar like her sanity depends on it. Her problem isn't that she's a workaholic who hasn't taken a vacation day in 2 years, even though her best friend keeps telling her she needs to relax before she has a breakdown. No, Clara's real problem is that she wants something so badly she can taste it, and that something is a promotion to senior editor that feels like it's always just out of reach no matter how hard she works. Clara was the kind of person who wore stiff business suits even on casual Fridays, the kind who brought her lunch in perfectly organized containers and never ate at her desk because crumbs were unprofessional. She believed in order and structure and following the rules because rules existed for a reason, and chaos was just another word for failure waiting to happen. Her apartment looked like a page out of an interior design magazine, everything in its place, nothing out of order. She had a plan for her life, and that plan included becoming the youngest senior editor in the company's history by the time she turned 27. But plans have a funny way of falling apart when you least expect it, and Clara's plan was about to explode in her face in the most spectacular way possible. It started on a Monday morning, which should have been her first clue that the universe was conspiring against her. Clara walked into the office at exactly 7:45 a.m. like she did every single day, carrying her coffee in one hand and her perfectly organized briefcase in the other. She was mentally preparing for her 9 o'clock meeting with her boss, Miranda Hayes, who was the editor-in-chief and possibly the most terrifying woman Clara had ever met in her entire life. Miranda was the kind of boss who could make grown men cry with just a look, the kind who had built her reputation on being ruthless and uncompromising and absolutely brilliant at her job. She didn't do small talk or pleasantries, and she definitely didn't accept excuses. If you worked for Miranda Hayes, you delivered results or you packed your desk, and there was no middle ground. Clara had been assigned to work with one of their biggest authors 6 months ago, a best-selling thriller writer named Ezra Cole who had made the company millions of dollars with his previous 3 books. The assignment should have been Clara's big break, her chance to prove she could handle high-profile clients and deliver manuscripts that would top the bestseller lists. But there was just one tiny problem that had turned into a massive disaster. Ezra Cole hadn't written a single word in 6 months, and his manuscript was now 3 months overdue. Clara had tried everything she could think of to get him to write. She had sent encouraging emails and motivational quotes and helpful writing prompts. She had called him every week, and then every day, and then every few hours. She had even shown up at his apartment twice, only to be told by his doorman that Mr. Cole wasn't accepting visitors. The man was a ghost, completely unreachable, and Clara's career was dying because of it. So when Clara's phone rang at 8:30 that Monday morning and she saw Miranda's name on the screen, her stomach dropped to her feet because she knew this conversation wasn't going to be about anything good. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her already perfect blazer, and answered in her most professional voice. "Good morning, Miranda. My office." Now, Miranda's voice came through the phone like ice water, and then the line went dead. Clara grabbed her notebook and her coffee and practically ran to Miranda's office on the top floor, her heels clicking rapidly on the polished floors. When she knocked on the door, Miranda's assistant just waved her in without looking up, which was never a good sign. Clara stepped inside the massive corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the New York skyline, and she found Miranda sitting behind her desk with an expression that could freeze fire. "Sit," Miranda said, not looking up from whatever she was reading on her computer screen. Clara sat in one of the expensive leather chairs across from the desk and waited, her hands folded neatly in her lap even though her palms were sweating. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. And then Miranda finally looked at her with those sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Ezra Cole's manuscript was due 3 months ago, Miranda said, and her voice was dangerously calm. I have the marketing team breathing down my neck because they've already scheduled the book tour. I have the sales team panicking because we promised our distributors a delivery date. And I have our investors asking me why one of our most profitable authors has gone completely silent. So tell me, Clara, where is the book? I'm working on it, Clara said, and she hated how weak her voice sounded. I've been in constant contact with Ezra, and he assures me that he's writing and that the manuscript will be ready soon. Constant contact? Miranda raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Really? Because I just got off the phone with his agent, and she told me that Ezra hasn't responded to anyone in 2 weeks. She also told me that he was photographed at 3 different nightclubs last week with 3 different models, which means he's out partying instead of working. Does that sound like someone who's writing to you? Clara felt her face getting hot with embarrassment and frustration. I wasn't aware of that. I'll reach out to him again today and get a firm timeline. No, Miranda said, and she stood up from her desk and walked over to the windows, looking out at the city below. You're not going to reach out to him. You're going to go to his apartment right now, and you're not leaving until you have a manuscript or at least a concrete plan for getting one. I don't care if you have to camp out in his living room for a week. I don't care if you have to physically sit there and watch him type every single word. You're going to fix this situation, Clara, because if you don't, I'm going to have to tell the board that we need to cancel the book and return the advance, which is $2 million that we've already spent on marketing. She turned around and looked at Clara with an expression that made it very clear this was not a negotiation. Get me that manuscript by the end of this month, or you're fired. Do you understand? Clara felt like someone had punched her in the stomach, but she forced herself to nod and stand up on legs that suddenly felt very unsteady. Yes, I understand. I'll handle it. You'd better, Miranda said, already turning back to her computer and dismissing Clara without another word. Clara walked out of that office feeling like her entire world was crumbling around her, and she went straight back to her desk and started making plans. She pulled up Ezra Cole's address, which she had memorized by now after all her failed attempts to contact him, and she grabbed her coat and her bag. She didn't bother telling anyone where she was going, because she didn't have time for explanations. She had a job to save, and an author to hunt down, and failure was not an option. The taxi ride to Ezra's apartment in the Upper West Side took 20 minutes, and Clara spent the entire time rehearsing what she was going to say to him. She was going to be firm but professional. She was going to make it clear that this wasn't optional anymore. She was going to get that manuscript by any means necessary, even if it meant she had to become his worst nightmare. Hey, my people, if you're already invested in Clara's struggle and you want to see how this disaster unfolds, please like this video and comment where in the world you're watching from. Are you in New York? Lagos? London? Let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to our storytelling channel, because this romance is about to get absolutely chaotic. Now let's get back to Clara, because she's about to meet Ezra for the first time and it's not going to go the way she expects. Ezra's building was one of those expensive pre-war buildings with a fancy lobby and a doorman who looked at Clara like she was there to cause trouble. I'm here to see Ezra Cole, Clara said, using her best authoritative voice. I'm his editor from Sterling and Rose Publishing. The doorman looked skeptical but picked up the phone and called up to the apartment. After a brief conversation that Clara couldn't hear, he hung up and shook his head. Mr. Cole says he's not expecting anyone today. I don't care if he's expecting me, Clara said, and she was done being polite. Tell Mr. Cole that his editor is here and she's not leaving until she sees him. Tell him it's about the $2 million advance that he's currently wasting on bottle service and models. The doorman's eyes went wide, and he picked up the phone again and relayed the message with a bit more urgency this time. There was a longer pause, and then he hung up and gestured toward the elevators. Penthouse. Elevator on the right. Clara rode up to the top floor with her heart pounding and her jaw clenched, and when the elevator doors opened directly into Ezra's apartment, she stepped out and immediately wanted to turn around and leave. The place was a complete disaster. There were pizza boxes stacked on the coffee table, empty bottles scattered across every surface, and clothes thrown over furniture like some kind of fabric explosion had occurred. The curtains were drawn, making the whole space dark and cave-like even though it was 9:30 in the morning. And in the middle of this chaos, sitting on a very expensive-looking couch with a video game controller in his hands and wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days, was Ezra Cole himself. He didn't look up when Clara stepped out of the elevator, just kept playing his game with an intensity that suggested he was trying very hard to pretend she wasn't there. Clara stood there for a moment, taking in the scene, and she felt her carefully rehearsed speech evaporating because nothing could have prepared her for this level of mess. Where is the book, Ezra? Clara asked, and her voice came out sharper than she intended. Ezra finally paused his game and looked up at her, and Clara had to admit that even looking like a disaster, the man was annoyingly attractive. He had dark hair that was too long and messy, sharp features that photographs didn't quite capture, and eyes that were a very distracting shade of green. He also had the kind of smile that probably got him out of trouble more often than it should, and he was using that smile right now like it was going to work on her. "You must be Clara," Ezra said, setting down his controller and stretching like he had all the time in the world. "I've been ignoring your emails." "Did you notice?" "I noticed," Clara said through gritted teeth. "What I didn't notice was any progress on the manuscript that's now 3 months overdue and costing the company money we don't have." Ezra laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh that suggested he found this whole situation amusing in a way that made Clara want to throw something at his head. "I can't write," he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "My muse is dead, gone, disappeared into the void. Also, in case you haven't noticed, the press is absolutely destroying me because I was photographed with 3 different women last week. Apparently, I'm a womanizing party boy with no substance, and that's not exactly inspiring creative energy." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "So your solution is to sit here playing video games and proving them right?" "My solution," Ezra said, standing up and walking over to his kitchen where he grabbed a beer from the fridge even though it wasn't even 10 a.m. yet, "is to accept that I'm done. I'm burnt out. I'm a one-hit wonder who got lucky 3 times, and now the well is dry. You should go back and tell your scary boss to cancel the contract and move on." "I'm not doing that," Clara said, following him into the kitchen. "You're going to write this book, Ezra, because my entire career depends on it, and I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've worked for just because you're having a creative tantrum." Ezra turned to look at her, and something shifted in his expression. He set down the beer and leaned against the counter, studying her with an intensity that made Clara suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "You know what?" he said slowly, and she could practically see the wheels turning in his head. "I have an idea. A crazy idea, but it might actually work." "I'm listening," Clara said cautiously. "I need a rebrand," Ezra said. "I need to fix my image and get the press off my back so I can actually focus on writing. And I need motivation, someone to keep me accountable and make sure I'm actually working, instead of just saying I'm working. So here's my offer. I'll finish the book in 30 days, but only if you come with me to my cabin in Vermont and pretend to be my loving, stable fiancé." Clara's mouth fell open. "Are you insane?" "Probably," Ezra said with that infuriating smile. "But think about it. The press loves a good redemption story. Party Boy settles down with smart, beautiful editor. We stage a few photos, post some cute couple content on social media, and suddenly I'm not the villain anymore. I'm the guy who found love and turned his life around. And while we're doing that, you can literally stand over my shoulder and make sure I'm writing 2,000 words a day. 30 days, 1 book, and both our problems are solved." "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Clara said, but even as she said it, part of her brain was already calculating whether it could actually work. "I'm your editor, not your prop. I'm not going to pretend to be your fiancé just to save your reputation." Her phone rang at that exact moment, and Clara looked down to see Miranda's name on the screen again. Her stomach dropped because she had been gone for less than an hour and Miranda was already checking in, which meant the pressure was even worse than she thought. She answered the call and immediately heard Miranda's voice, cold and sharp. "Well, I'm with him now," Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We're working on a solution." "You have until the end of the month, Clara," Miranda said. "That's 4 weeks. If you don't have a manuscript on my desk by then, pack your things." The line went dead, and Clara stood there staring at her phone and then at Ezra, who was watching her with raised eyebrows and that knowing smile that suggested he already knew what her answer was going to be. "Fine," Clara said, and the word tasted like defeat in her mouth. "I'll do it. But we're doing this my way, with rules and boundaries, and a proper contract." "Of course," Ezra said, and he extended his hand for her to shake. "Welcome to the fake engagement, Clara Vance. I promise this will be the most interesting 30 days of your life." Clara shook his hand and felt like she had just made a deal with the devil himself, but what choice did she have? Her career was on the line, and sometimes desperate times called for absolutely insane measures. She just hoped she wasn't going to regret this decision for the rest of her life. Clara went home that evening and immediately opened her laptop, because if she was going to do something this absolutely insane, she was going to do it properly with legal documentation and clear boundaries that left no room for confusion or chaos. She spent 3 hours drafting a contract that covered every possible scenario she could think of, typing furiously while drinking her 3rd cup of coffee, and questioning every life choice that had led her to this moment. The contract was 5 pages long by the time she finished, printed on official company letterhead, because Clara believed that if something was worth doing, it was worth making it look professional. She read through it one more time, making small edits and adjustments, and then she sent a copy to Ezra's email with a message that said simply, "Review this and meet me at Sterling Cafe tomorrow at 9 a.m. to sign. No negotiations. Ezra's response came back 30 seconds later, which meant he definitely hadn't read the entire document. Can't wait to see what rules you've invented for fake love. See you tomorrow, future fake fiancé. Clara wanted to throw her laptop across the room, but instead she closed it very carefully and went to bed, where she spent the next 6 hours staring at the ceiling and wondering if she had completely lost her mind. She kept replaying the conversation with Ezra in her head, analyzing every word and every expression, trying to figure out if this plan had even the slightest chance of actually working, or if she was just setting herself up for the most spectacular failure of her career. The next morning, Clara arrived at the cafe exactly 15 minutes early because she was never late to anything, and she ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table with 2 printed copies of the contract laid out in front of her. She had highlighted the most important sections in yellow and marked the signature lines with sticky tabs, and she had brought 3 different pens just in case one of them ran out of ink. Ezra walked in 20 minutes late, of course, because apparently being on time was not something that concerned him. He was wearing jeans and a leather jacket and sunglasses even though it wasn't particularly sunny outside, and he had 2 coffees in his hands, one of which he set down in front of Clara without asking if she wanted it. "I brought you a latte," Ezra said, sliding into the chair across from her and pulling off his sunglasses. "You look like someone who secretly wants a latte but orders black coffee because it seems more professional." "I don't want a latte," Clara said, even though the coffee did smell really good and she actually did like lattes. "I want you to read this contract and sign it so we can establish clear parameters for this arrangement." "Parameters," Ezra repeated, picking up one of the contracts and flipping through the pages with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing hilarious. "Wow, you really went all out here." Clause 1. No touching unless cameras are present. Clause 2. Mandatory 2,000 words per day with progress reports every evening. Clause 3. Separate sleeping arrangements at all times. Clause 4. No personal questions about family, relationships, or emotional history. "You're really fun at parties, aren't you?" "This isn't a party," Clara said, ignoring the jab. "This is a business arrangement, and I need to make sure we both understand exactly what we're agreeing to. If we're going to spend 30 days together pretending to be engaged, there need to be boundaries." Ezra set down the contract and pulled out a pen from his jacket pocket, but instead of signing it, he started writing something in the margin of the last page. Clara watched with growing irritation as he scribbled for almost a full minute, and then he slid the contract back across the table to her with a smile that was definitely up to no good. "I added one more clause," Ezra said. "Read it." Clara picked up the contract and looked at the handwritten addition at the bottom, and her eyes went wide as she read the words. Clause 5, the emotional detachment clause. Neither party is allowed to fall in love during the duration of this agreement. If either party catches feelings, the contract is void, and the guilty party must immediately confess and withdraw from the arrangement. Violating this clause results in immediate termination of all professional and personal agreements. She looked up at Ezra with disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You want to add a clause about not falling in love?" "Absolutely," Ezra said, and he was still smiling, but there was something sharp in his eyes now. "Because here's the thing, Clara. You're exactly the type of person who goes into something like this thinking you're completely in control, and then somewhere around day 15 you're going to realize you're in over your head. And I need to protect myself from that, because the last thing I need is my fake fiancé actually falling for me and complicating everything." Clara felt her face getting hot with anger and embarrassment. "Trust me, that is not going to be a problem. I don't even like you as a person, let alone as a romantic prospect. You're arrogant and irresponsible, and you play video games at 9 in the morning instead of working." "Perfect," Ezra said, completely unbothered by her assessment of his character. "Then you should have no problem signing it." Clara grabbed her pen and signed both copies of the contract with more force than was probably necessary, and then she shoved one across the table to Ezra. "There. Happy now?" "Delighted," Ezra said, signing his own copy with a flourish. "So when do we leave for Vermont?" "Tomorrow morning," Clara said, pulling out her phone and showing him the detailed itinerary she had already created. "I've arranged for a car service to pick us up at 6 a.m. The drive is approximately 4 hours, which means we'll arrive at the cabin by 10:30, giving us the full day to settle in and establish our working routine. I've also contacted a photographer friend who owes me a favor, and she's going to meet us there tomorrow afternoon to take some staged engagement photos that we can leak to the press." Ezra stared at her. "You planned all of this in one night?" "I don't do anything halfway," Clara said, gathering up her copy of the contract and putting it in her bag. "If we're going to sell this fake engagement story, we need to commit to it completely. That means photos, social media posts, and a consistent narrative. The story is that we met 6 months ago when you came into the office for a meeting. We started dating secretly because we wanted to keep it professional, And you proposed last week during a romantic dinner. Simple, believable, and backed up by carefully curated evidence. You're kind of terrifying, Ezra said. But he sounded impressed rather than intimidated. Has anyone ever told you that? Frequently, Clara said, standing up and slinging her bag over her shoulder. I'll text you the address where the car will pick you up. Pack for 30 days, bring your laptop and anything else you need to write. And please try to look like someone who's excited to be engaged to me and not like you're being forced into witness protection. She walked out of the cafe without waiting for his response, and she didn't look back because she couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. She had made her choice, signed the contract, and committed to this absolutely insane plan. All she could do now was follow through and hope that 30 days from now she would have a manuscript and her promotion instead of unemployment and a broken career. The next morning came way too early, and Clara stood outside her apartment building at exactly 5:55 a.m., with 2 perfectly packed suitcases and a travel mug of coffee. The Blacktown car pulled up right on schedule, and she loaded her bags into the trunk before sliding into the back seat to wait for Ezra. 20 minutes later, Ezra came stumbling out of his building with 1 duffel bag and a backpack, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, and looking like he had just rolled out of bed, which he probably had. He threw his bags in the trunk and collapsed into the seat next to Clara, immediately closing his eyes like he was planning to sleep for the entire drive. Good morning to you too, Clara said sarcastically. It's 6 in the morning, Ezra mumbled without opening his eyes. Morning doesn't exist before 8. This is still nighttime. Clara decided not to respond and instead pulled out her tablet to review her notes for the next 30 days. She had created a detailed schedule that blocked out writing time, meal times, exercise time, and social media posting times. She had researched the best angles for engagement photos and compiled a list of couple activities they could stage for content. She had even drafted several social media captions that struck the right balance between romantic and authentic. About an hour into the drive, Ezra finally opened his eyes and looked over at what Clara was working on. Are you seriously planning our fake relationship in 15-minute increments? Organization is the key to success, Clara said without looking up from her tablet. If we want people to believe this engagement is real, we need to be strategic about how we present it. Or, Ezra said, reaching over and gently pushing her tablet down so she had to look at him, we could just act like actual human beings who are actually in love and let it happen naturally. Crazy idea, I know. Clara pulled her tablet back up. Natural is how mistakes happen. I prefer controlled. I bet you do, Ezra said, and there was something in his tone that made Clara glance at him sharply, but he was already looking out the window at the passing landscape. Hey fam, can you feel the tension building between these two? Clara wants everything perfectly controlled, while Ezra is all about chaos and spontaneity. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video and drop a comment about whether you think Clara can actually keep her emotions in check for 30 days. And make sure you subscribe to our channel, because episode 3 is going to turn up the heat in ways Clara definitely didn't plan for. Now let's get back to Vermont, where things are about to get very interesting. They arrived at the cabin just after 10:30, and Clara's first thought when she saw it was that Ezra had somehow failed to mention one very important detail. The cabin was beautiful, rustic and charming, with large windows that overlooked a frozen lake and snow-covered pine trees stretching as far as she could see. But it was also very clearly a one-bedroom cabin, which was not at all what Clara had been expecting. Where am I sleeping? Clara asked as they carried their bags inside. There's a couch, Ezra said, gesturing to the living room where a comfortable-looking sofa sat in front of a stone fireplace. You can take the bedroom, I'll sleep out here. I'm a gentleman despite what the tabloids say. Clara wanted to argue, but the bedroom did have a door that locked, and the couch actually did look comfortable, so she decided to let it go. She wheeled her suitcases into the bedroom and immediately started unpacking and organizing, hanging her clothes in the closet by color and category, setting up her toiletries in the bathroom with military precision. When she came back out to the main living area, she found Ezra had already made himself at home in the worst way possible. His duffel bag was exploded across the floor, clothes scattered everywhere. His laptop was on the coffee table, surrounded by empty snack wrappers. He had his feet up on the couch and was scrolling through his phone with zero urgency. We need to establish the workspace, Clara said, trying to keep her voice calm. You'll write at the desk by the window, where you have natural light. I'll set up my editing station at the dining table. We start at 9 a.m. sharp every morning, break for lunch at noon, and resume until 5 p.m. After dinner, you'll send me your daily word count for review. Or, Ezra said, not looking up from his phone, I could write when inspiration strikes, and you could relax for once in your life. Inspiration doesn't pay the bills, Clara said. Structure and discipline pay the bills. Now please pick up your clothes and put them somewhere that isn't the middle of the floor. Ezra finally looked up at her, and instead of arguing, he smiled that infuriating smile again. You know what? This is going to be fun. Watching you try to control everything while slowly losing your mind over the next 30 days. I'm genuinely looking forward to it. I'm not going to lose my mind, Clara said firmly. I'm going to stay focused on the goal, which is getting your manuscript finished and saving both of our careers. Everything else is just noise. Sure, Ezra said, standing up and stretching. Whatever you say, boss. But just for the record, when you do eventually crack, I'm going to remind you that I called it. He walked past her toward the bedroom, and as he did, he deliberately knocked over one of her perfectly arranged stacks of papers on the dining table. Clara watched the papers scatter across the floor, and she took a very deep breath before bending down to pick them up and reorganize them. 30 days, she told herself. She just had to survive 30 days with this impossible man, and then she could go back to her normal, controlled, perfectly organized life. How hard could it possibly be? The photographer arrived that afternoon as scheduled, and Clara changed into one of the outfits she had specifically packed for the photo shoot, a cream-colored sweater and jeans that looked casual but expensive. Ezra came out of the bedroom wearing basically the same thing he had been wearing all day, but somehow he still looked annoyingly good. Okay, you two, the photographer said. Her name was Jessica, and she had been Clara's roommate in college. I need you to look like you're actually in love. Clara, I know that's going to be hard for you because you look like you're about to murder him, so maybe try to soften your expression a little. I'm trying, Clara said through a smile that felt more like a grimace. Try harder, Jessica said. Ezra, put your arm around her. Clara, lean into him like you actually want to be there. Pretend he's not whatever he clearly is that's making you so tense. Ezra wrapped his arm around Clara's waist and pulled her close, and Clara immediately stiffened because this was the first time they had actually touched beyond a handshake. She could feel the warmth of his body through her sweater and smell whatever cologne he was wearing, something that was probably way too expensive and definitely too distracting. Relax, Ezra whispered in her ear, and his breath on her neck made her shiver involuntarily. Remember Clause 1. Touching is allowed for cameras. This is literally what you signed up for. Clara forced herself to relax and lean into him, tilting her head slightly so her hair fell over her shoulder. Jessica snapped several photos, directing them to move closer, to look at each other, to smile like they shared secrets that nobody else knew. Now kiss, Jessica said casually. Both Clara and Ezra froze. That wasn't in the itinerary, Clara said. It's an engagement photo shoot, Jessica said, lowering her camera to look at them with raised eyebrows. People are going to expect at least one photo of you two kissing. Unless you want everyone to immediately call this fake? Clara looked at Ezra, and Ezra looked back at her, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Ezra leaned down slowly, giving Clara plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was supposed to be quick and staged, but somehow wasn't. The kiss lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like much longer, and when they finally pulled apart, Clara's heart was racing in a way that had nothing to do with the cold Vermont air. Ezra was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between surprise and something else entirely. Perfect, Jessica said, checking her camera. That looked totally real. You guys are better actors than I thought. Clara stepped away from Ezra quickly, putting distance between them. Are we done? She asked, and her voice came out shakier than she intended. Yeah, I think I got enough, Jessica said, already packing up her equipment. I'll edit these tonight and send you the files tomorrow. You two should post one this weekend to maximize engagement. After Jessica left, Clara and Ezra stood in the cabin in awkward silence. Finally, Ezra spoke. That was part of the arrangement. Clara cut him off quickly. Just business. Just for the photos. It didn't mean anything, right? Ezra said slowly. Of course it didn't. But as Clara walked back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, something that wasn't supposed to happen and definitely wasn't part of her carefully planned itinerary. And that scared her more than anything else. The first week at the cabin passed in a strange rhythm that Clara couldn't quite get used to, no matter how many schedules she made or how many times she reorganized her workspace. Ezra was infuriating in ways she hadn't anticipated, not because he was lazy or difficult, but because he was actually writing, and the words coming out of him were surprisingly good, which meant Clara couldn't even be properly angry at him. Every morning, Ezra would wake up around 8:30, which was late by Clara's standards but earlier than she'd expected from him. He would make coffee for both of them without being asked, always adding the exact amount of cream and sugar that Clara liked even though she had never told him her preferences. Then he would sit at the desk by the window and actually write for hours, his fingers flying over the keyboard while Clara pretended to work on her own projects but mostly found herself watching him and wondering what was going on in that chaotic brain of his. But Ezra was also a complete disaster when it came to basic living skills. He left coffee mugs on every available surface, never in the same place twice. He threw his towels on the bathroom floor after showering. He played music while he wrote, usually classic rock or jazz that was way too loud and completely disrupted Clara's concentration. And worst of all, he had a habit of leaving cabinet doors open in the kitchen, which drove Clara absolutely insane because who does that? Why? Clara asked on the 5th day, walking into the kitchen and closing 3 cabinet doors that Ezra had left hanging open. Why can't you just close the cabinets after you use them? It takes literally 1 second. Ezra looked up from where he was making lunch, which appeared to be some kind of gourmet sandwich that smelled way better than anything Clara had packed in her meal prep containers. "I don't know," he said with a shrug. "I guess I figure I'm just going to open them again in 5 minutes anyway, so why bother closing them?" "Because that's how civilized people live," Clara said, but she couldn't put much heat into it because Ezra was now slicing the sandwich in half and putting one half on a plate for her without asking if she wanted it. "Try this," Ezra said, sliding the plate across the counter to her. "It's turkey and brie with fig jam and arugula on sourdough. I made the fig jam myself last summer." "You made jam?" Clara asked skeptically, picking up the sandwich half. "I contain multitudes," Ezra said with that smile that was becoming dangerously familiar. "Party boy, video game addict, and secret chef. I'm a walking contradiction." Clara took a bite of the sandwich and immediately hated that it was delicious. Because it would have been so much easier to dislike Ezra if he was bad at everything, instead of being annoyingly talented at random things. "It's acceptable," she said, which was as close to a compliment as she was willing to give. "High praise from the Ice Queen," Ezra said, biting into his own half. "I'll take it." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and then Ezra's phone buzzed with a notification. He picked it up, and his expression immediately darkened as he read whatever was on the screen. Clara watched his jaw tighten and his eyes narrow, and she felt a strange urge to ask what was wrong, even though Clause 4 of their contract specifically prohibited personal questions. "The engagement photos are working," Ezra said finally, turning his phone around to show Clara. "Look at this headline. Bad boy author Ezra Cole settles down with mystery woman. They're calling you my redemption arc." Clara looked at the article, which featured one of the photos Jessica had taken of them standing by the lake with Ezra's arms around her waist and both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The comments section was full of people saying how happy Ezra looked and how good this relationship seemed to be for him. There were also a few comments from people who clearly didn't believe it was real, but those were getting drowned out by the positive responses. "Mission accomplished," Clara said, handing the phone back. "Your image is being rehabilitated. Now you can focus on writing without the press bothering you about your personal life." "Yeah," Ezra said, but he didn't sound happy about it. He set his phone face down on the counter and went back to his sandwich, but Clara could tell something was bothering him. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, and then immediately regretted it because she was breaking her own rule about personal questions. "I mean, you don't have to answer that. Never mind." Ezra looked at her with surprise. "Did Clara Vance just ask me a personal question? Is the world ending? Should I check for signs of the apocalypse?" "Forget I said anything," Clara said, standing up to put her plate in the sink. "No, wait," Ezra said, and he actually sounded sincere now. "You want to know what's bothering me? It's the fact that a fake relationship is getting me more positive press than anything real I've ever done. These people don't know me. They're just happy that I'm not embarrassing anymore, that I've been packaged into something acceptable. And the irony is that the woman who's helping me fake this image is the same woman who looks at me like I'm a project that needs fixing." Clara turned around to face him, and she felt something uncomfortable twisting in her chest. "I don't look at you like that." "Yes, you do," Ezra said. But he didn't sound angry, just tired. "You look at me and you see someone who's wasting his potential. Someone who needs structure and discipline, and someone to tell him how to live his life properly. And maybe you're right. Maybe I am a mess, but at least I'm an honest mess, which is more than I can say for this whole situation." He stood up and walked past Clara toward his laptop, effectively ending the conversation. And Clara was left standing in the kitchen feeling like she had just been slapped with a truth she wasn't ready to hear. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she didn't think he needed fixing, but the words wouldn't come because maybe part of what he said was actually true. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of Ezra moving around in the living room, probably writing because he often worked late into the night when inspiration struck. Around midnight, she heard him curse loudly, and then the sound of him pacing back and forth across the hardwood floors. Clara got out of bed and opened the bedroom door, finding Ezra standing in front of his laptop with his hands in his hair, looking frustrated in a way she hadn't seen before. "What's wrong?" she asked. Ezra spun around, clearly not expecting her to be awake. "I'm stuck," he said. "There's this romantic scene between the two main characters, and I can't get it right. Every time I write it, it feels forced or fake, or like I'm just copying something I've read before. I need to feel it, you know? I need to understand the emotional truth of it. Clara walked closer, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. What's the scene about? It's the moment where the male lead realizes he's in love with the female lead, Ezra said, running his hand through his already messy hair. They're stuck together in close quarters, forced to work together, and he's been fighting his feelings for weeks because he knows it's a bad idea. But then there's this moment, this tiny domestic moment where she does something completely mundane like making coffee or folding laundry, and he just knows. He can't fight it anymore. Clara's heart started beating faster because that description sounded uncomfortably familiar. And you can't write it because? Because I need to feel what he's feeling, Ezra said, and he was looking at her now with an intensity that made Clara want to step backward but also made her feet feel frozen to the floor. I need to understand what it's like to be in that moment where everything shifts and you realize you're in trouble. Hey, my people, can you feel how dangerous this is getting? These two are standing in a cabin at midnight talking about romantic moments and falling in love, and they have a literal clause in their contract that says they're not allowed to catch feelings. If you're hooked on this story, please like this video and comment whether you think Ezra is still talking about his characters or if he's talking about something else entirely. Don't forget to subscribe, because episode 4 is going to shatter everything Clara thinks she has under control. Now let's get back to this cabin where things are about to get very real. So what do you need from me? Clara asked, even though part of her brain was screaming at her to go back to the bedroom and lock the door. Help me act it out, Ezra said. Just for reference, just so I can get the blocking right and understand the physical proximity and the tension. It's a writing exercise, nothing more. Clara knew this was a terrible idea, but she also knew that she had come to Vermont specifically to help Ezra finish his book, and if this is what he needed, then technically it fell under her job description. Fine, she said. What do you need me to do? Ezra moved some of the papers off the couch and gestured for Clara to sit down. Okay, so in the scene, she's sitting here reading, and he comes over to ask her a question about something mundane. But when he gets close, he notices details he's never noticed before. The way her hair falls across her face, the way she bites her lip when she's concentrating, the way his sweater looks on her because she borrowed it earlier when she was cold. Clara sat down on the couch and picked up the nearest book, pretending to read it even though her hands were shaking slightly. Ezra walked over and stood next to the couch, looking down at her, and Clara could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Can I ask you something? Ezra said, and his voice had dropped lower, more intimate. That's your line? Clara asked, trying to keep her tone light and professional. Yeah, Ezra said, and then she looks up at him, and their eyes meet, and that's when he realizes he's completely lost. That's the moment everything changes. Clara looked up at him, and the expression on Ezra's face made her breath catch in her throat. He wasn't acting anymore, or if he was doing a really good job of it. He took a step closer, and Clara could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of the wood fire that had been burning earlier. In the book, Clara said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. What happens next? In the book, Ezra said, and he reached out slowly and tucked a strand of Clara's hair behind her ear, his fingers barely touching her skin but leaving trails of heat where they passed. He tells himself he needs to walk away. He reminds himself of all the reasons this is a bad idea. But he can't move. He's frozen there, caught between what he should do and what he wants to do. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Ezra could hear it. And what does he want to do? Ezra leaned down, bringing his face closer to hers, close enough that Clara could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. He wants to kiss her, Ezra whispered. He wants to forget about all the rules and contracts and reasons why they shouldn't be doing this. He wants to just feel something real for once, instead of performing for cameras or living up to other people's expectations. They were so close now that Clara could feel Ezra's breath on her lips, and every single rational thought in her brain was screaming at her to move away, to remember Clause 1 and Clause 5 and all the very good reasons they had written those clauses in the first place. But her body wasn't listening to her brain anymore, and she found herself leaning forward just slightly, closing the distance by a fraction of an inch. Ezra, Clara said, and it was supposed to be a warning, but it came out sounding like permission. Ezra's hand moved from her hair to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin in a gesture that was achingly gentle. Tell me to stop, he said. Tell me this is just research for the book and nothing more. Clara opened her mouth to say exactly that, to remind him of the contract and the boundaries and all the very good reasons they needed to maintain professional distance. But what came out instead was, "What if I don't want you to stop?" The words hung in the air between them for what felt like an eternity, and Clara watched Ezra's eyes widen with something that looked like hope mixed with fear. He started to lean in closer, his lips just inches from hers, and Clara's eyes started to flutter closed in anticipation. And then, with a crash that made them both jump apart like they'd been electrocuted, the front door of the cabin burst open and a blast of cold air rushed in along with a figure covered in snow. "Ezra," a woman's voice called out, high and sharp and familiar in a way that made Ezra's face go completely white. "I know you're here. Your agent told me about your little writing retreat." Clara watched in shock as a stunning blonde woman in an expensive coat and designer boots stomped into the cabin, shaking snow out of her hair and looking around like she owned the place. The woman's eyes landed on Clara sitting on the couch, and then moved to Ezra standing next to her looking guilty and frozen, and her expression transformed from annoyed to absolutely furious. "Are you kidding me right now?" the woman said, her voice rising to a level that suggested she was about 3 seconds away from breaking something. "I drive 4 hours through a blizzard to save our relationship, and I find you here playing house with some random girl?" "Madison," Ezra said, and his voice sounded strangled. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Madison repeated, and she laughed in a way that had no humor in it whatsoever. "I'm here because you won't return my calls. I'm here because I saw the engagement photos all over social media, and I know they're fake because we were together 3 weeks ago. I'm here because you owe me an explanation." Clara stood up from the couch, her brain trying to process what was happening. "You were together 3 weeks ago?" she repeated, looking at Ezra with growing horror. 3 weeks ago was after you proposed this whole fake engagement plan to me." "Clara, I can explain," Ezra started, but Madison cut him off. "Oh my God," Madison said, and she was looking between Clara and Ezra with dawning realization. "The engagement is fake? You're paying someone to pretend to be your fiancé? That's pathetic even for you, Ezra." "I'm not paying her," Ezra said, and he sounded defensive now. "It's a business arrangement. Clara is my editor, and we're just trying to manage my public image while I finish my book." "Right," Madison said, and she walked over to stand directly in front of Clara, looking her up and down with undisguised disdain. "Business arrangement. Is that why you were about to kiss her when I walked in? Did that come with the contract too?" Clara felt like the floor had dropped out from underneath her, and she looked at Ezra with betrayal written all over her face. "You have a girlfriend?" she asked quietly. "Ex-girlfriend," Ezra said quickly. "Madison and I broke up 2 months ago. She's just having trouble accepting it." "We did not break up," Madison shouted. "You said you needed space to work on your book. That's not a breakup, that's a break. And now I find out you've been using that space to shack up with your editor and stage fake engagement photos? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "You need to leave, Madison," Ezra said, and his voice had gone cold in a way Clara had never heard before. "You and I are done. We've been done for months. You just refuse to accept it." "I'm not going anywhere," Madison said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Not until you tell me the truth about what's really going on here. Because those photos looked pretty real to me, Ezra. The way you were looking at her didn't look fake at all." Clara couldn't take it anymore. She walked past both of them toward the bedroom, ignoring Ezra calling her name. She grabbed her phone and her laptop and shoved them into her bag, not bothering to pack properly because she just needed to get out of this cabin and away from this situation that had spiraled completely out of her control. "Clara, wait," Ezra said, following her to the bedroom door. "Please don't leave. Let me explain what's happening." "I think Madison already explained it pretty clearly," Clara said, and she was surprised at how calm her voice sounded when inside she felt like she was falling apart. "You lied to me. You said you needed to fix your image as a party boy, but you failed to mention you had a girlfriend who you were apparently still seeing while you were setting up this fake engagement with me." "I wasn't seeing her," Ezra said desperately. "She showed up at my apartment a few weeks ago and we talked, that's all. I told her it was over. I've been telling her it's over for months, but she won't listen." "That's not the point," Clara said, zipping up her bag and slinging it over her shoulder. "The point is that you weren't honest with me about your situation. The point is that I just almost kissed you while violating our contract, and now I find out that even if we had kissed, I would have been the other woman in whatever complicated situation you have with Madison." "There is no situation with Madison," Ezra said, and he looked genuinely distressed now. "Clara, please. Don't do this. We're only halfway through the 30 days. The book isn't finished yet." "Then I guess you'd better work fast," Clara said, pushing past him and heading for the front door. Madison was still standing in the living room, and she watched Clara with a satisfied smirk that made Clara want to scream. "Running away already?" Madison asked. "Smart move. Ezra always gets bored with his toys eventually." Clara stopped at the door and turned back to look at Ezra one last time. He was standing in the middle of the cabin looking lost and broken, and part of Clara wanted to stay and hear him out and believe whatever explanation he had. But the rational part of her brain, the part that had been trying to warn her all along that this was a terrible idea, was telling her to leave before she got hurt even worse. "The contract is void," Clara said. "Clause 5 was violated. We both know it. I'm going back to New York, and you're going to finish that manuscript on your own. Don't contact me unless it's to send me the completed book." She walked out into the snow without looking back.